Costa Rica greets the distinguished delegation from Malaysia. We'd like to thank them for presenting their report, which was the outcome of a broad consultative process. We have taken note of the progress achieved by Malaysia in the intersessional period between reviews. We congratulated the government on its recognition that promoting civil and political rights in the country must go hand in hand with major progress in the area of economic, social and cultural rights. We have also taken note of the information on the national debate underway on the death penalty, and in this connection we would urge you to consider a de facto moratorium on application with a view to the abolition of the death penalty. Our delegation would like to make the following recommendations. First, that Malaysia extend a standing invitation to human rights mechanisms of the United Nations, and second, that it accede to the international human rights core instruments, in particular the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the CAT, the OPCAT, the CERD and the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Thank you very much.
Start by extending a warm welcome to the delegation of Malaysia and to thank them for the presentation of their report. Croatia welcomes the legislative improvements undertaken by the government of Malaysia with a view to ensuring a better protection from domestic violence. We would also like to welcome the ratification of the UNCRPD and the withdrawal of reservations to Articles 5A, 7B and 16.2 of the CEDAW. Croatia believes that the principle of non-discrimination requires that human rights apply equally to every human being, regardless of their sexual orientation, and that states must ensure that sexual orientation or gender identity may under no circumstances be the basis for criminal penalties, in particular executions, arrests or detention. We would like to give two recommendations. First, ensure that children without parental care due to parental incarceration or execution are provided for, including with support for physical and mental health. Second, introduce legislation that will decriminalize sexual relations between consenting adults of the same sex. Thank you.
We welcome the delegation of Malaysia and we thank them for their excellent presentation. We congratulate them for tangible progress made in implementing the recommendations accepted as part of the first UPR Council. This shows that the government of Malaysia has made the promotion and protection of the human rights of their people a priority and are committed to it. There are various areas where we see positive results. We've seen progress in education and health, in fighting poverty and efforts to increase the living standards of the population. We would urge the country to continue on this path of success, and we recommend, first of all, that you intensify efforts to reduce maternal mortality, including through better access to quality family planning. Secondly, that you continue implementing measures to fight the prevalence of HIV, and that through the implementation of a national HIV prevention plan. We wish Malaysia all the best of success in this second UPR cycle. Thank you.
The Malaysian delegation to this session of the UPR. We commend the government for actively engaging with all relevant stakeholders, including civil society, in the preparation of its national report. We also note with satisfaction the adoption of laws aimed at improving the human rights situation in Malaysia. We encourage the government of Malaysia to continue with those national policies which are in the direction of consolidating the human rights infrastructure in the country. Cyprus would like to make the following recommendations. 1. That Malaysia builds on progress made as regards training programs on human rights and further improves such schemes. 2. To consider reducing the number of crimes for which the capital punishment may be handed, including non-violent crimes, as well as establishing a moratorium on the use of the death penalty. And 3. To intensify efforts so that children with disabilities have sufficient access to education and health facilities. I thank you.
Warmly welcomes the delegation of Malaysia. Despite some progress, the government of Malaysia has continued to use the Printing Presses and Publication Act, Official Secrets Act, or the Sedition Act to restrict the freedom of expression and the media, including on the internet. We therefore recommend that government of Malaysia bringing the respective laws in line with international human rights standards and enabling all citizens to exercise fully the rights of opinion and expression. Second, we recommend Malaysia revise the Peaceful Assembly Act so that there is no discrimination and hindrance in the organization of peaceful public gatherings and protests. Furthermore, we recommend that Malaysia continue in its judicial reforms, including strengthening the independence of the judiciary, enact a robust legislation outlawing torture and tackling impunity for acts of torture and ill treatment, and ensure that provisions for arrest and detention are in accordance with international human rights standards. Finally, the Czech Republic recommends that Malaysia become a party to ICCPR, ICESCR, the CAT and its optional protocol, the Yayasan and the Convention relating to the status of refugees and the protocol thereto. Thank you, Madam Vice.
Her Excellency Madam Ho Mei-yung, the Deputy Secretary General of the Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, for the presentation of a comprehensive and informative report. We appreciate the commitment and consistent efforts as well as achievements made by the government of Malaysia for the protection and promotion of human rights. As a multiracial country, Malaysia has made considerable progress in the field of human rights as exemplified in the enjoyment by all people of their equality, harmony and rights in accordance with the Constitution, and rapid economic growth, social development activities, as well as increased investment in the health and education sectors. My delegation encouraged the government of Malaysia to continue with these positive efforts, and in this regard recommends the following. First, to enhance its initiatives and programs to further instill a sense of national unity and pride among its people. Second, to continue implementing the positive initiatives introduced under the Malaysia concept with a view to strengthen national unity. Third, to take necessary steps to provide adequate facilities to improve access to education for persons with disabilities, especially children. Thank you, Madam President.
Delegation for their presentation today. We commend the government on its initiatives to further the rights of indigenous peoples, but remain concerned by the lack of free, prior and informed consent accorded to indigenous peoples in connection with appropriation of customary land. Denmark therefore recommends that the government of Malaysia allows for the visit of the UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous peoples. We commend the government on its initiatives to amend laws related to freedom of expression and opinion. Still, we are concerned about the amended Section 114A of the Evidence Act of July 2012, making individuals who host or operate online community forums, blogs or websites liable for all content published through their services, and thereby posing limitations to a free and open debate. Denmark therefore recommends that the government of Malaysia amend Section 114A of the Evidence Act with the objective of increasing freedom of expression. Thank you, Madam President.
We thank the delegation of Malaysia for being here with us and thank them for the presentation of their second comprehensive national report. We welcome the fact that the National Human Rights Commission has been able to meet the relevant criteria and acquire A status. Djibouti takes note of the fact that in July 2010, Malaysia ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and we pay tribute to the efforts that have been made to enshrine the principles of the CEDAW Convention. As part of this interactive dialogue, Djibouti wishes to make the following recommendations to Malaysia. First of all, we would urge the country to accede to the 1951 Convention on the Status of Refugees and also to accede to the 1967 Protocol. The second recommendation is that we would encourage the government to continue the significant progress it has made in fighting trafficking in persons. Thank you very much.
The delegation of Ecuador extends a very warm welcome to the delegation of Malaysia and values the extremely detailed information provided on human rights progress contained in its national report. Ecuador congratulates Malaysia for the support it is giving to the Intergovernmental Human Rights Commission of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and its sectoral bodies responsible for protecting the rights of women and children and the rights of migrant workers. Ecuador also salutes Malaysia's efforts to combat trafficking in persons and transnational organized crime, Ecuador would like to submit the following recommendations. First, that Malaysia ratify the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights and on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, as well as their optional protocols. And second, that it enter into the required consultations at the national level to find an alternative to the death penalty, and to the extent it is able to do so, analyze the possibility of establishing a moratorium on the death penalty. Thank you very much.
Implement the accepted recommendations of the first cycle. We welcome in specific the efforts exerted in strengthening the judicial institutions, promoting proper national housing policies, ensuring universal access to primary education, supporting empowerment of women, as well as adopting measures to facilitate the acquisition of nationality by children born to non-Malaysian mothers. We also commend the steps taken by the government to further promote harmony, coexistence and tolerance among its richly diverse social fabric. On the other hand, we took note that some challenges still persist in the areas of providing for better protection standards for persons with disabilities and combating trafficking in persons. Thus, we kindly invite the delegation of Malaysia to share with the Council its future plans on these two fronts. In conclusion, we present the following recommendations to the kind consideration of the delegation of Malaysia: to consider reviewing its position vis-à-vis acceding to the ICCPR, ICESCR, ICERD, CAT and ICRMW, to maintain its good example in observing the legal safeguards surrounding the application of death penalty, and finally to further its national efforts to eradicate trafficking in persons, especially women and children. Thank you.
Finland wishes to thank Malaysia for the national report and its presentation today. Finland is pleased to note that Malaysia has ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities and withdrawn some of its reservations to the human rights treaties it is party to. Finland recommends that Malaysia ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Convention Against Torture, and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination. We would appreciate information about measures taken in this regard. According to the report on the National Inquiry into the Land Rights of Indigenous Peoples, systemic issues have denied Indigenous peoples their full enjoyment of their legal and human rights. Finland recommends that Malaysia take measures with full and effective participation of Indigenous peoples to address the issues highlighted in the inquiry. Thank you.
Of Malaysia, and thank them for the comprehensive report and presentation. We are delighted by the positive progress in several areas of human rights and note with appreciation Malaysia's engagement with stakeholders in the preparation process of this report. The government of Malaysia commitment in the ensuring of empowerment of women is evident in the initiatives under the 10th Malaysia's plan focused on, inter alia, increasing women's participation in labor force, increasing the number of women in key decision-making positions, and improving the provisions in support women in challenging circumstances, such as widows, single mothers, and those with low incomes. My delegation would like to recommend the following. 1. Malaysia to continue efforts to empower women and underprivileged segments of the society, to take necessary measures to increase the percentage of women in decision-making positions in private and corporate sectors, and finally, continue to improve the criminal justice system for children, including by making the court more child-friendly, and to come up with the specialized responses to children in conflict with the law. I thank you, Madam President.
France welcomes Malaysia's ratification of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, also the fact that there's been the withdrawal of certain reservations to the CEDAW Convention. We make the following recommendations. First of all, that you ratify the following international conventions: the ICCPR, the ICESCR, the Convention Against Torture, the Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearances, the Convention for the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, the Rome Statute, and the 1951 Refugee Convention. Secondly, that there be an official moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing capital punishment. Also, that the capital punishment not be automatically applied to drug trafficking, and we recommend that all capital punishments be commuted to life prison sentences. Thirdly, that there be non-discrimination between men and women in law and in practice, and that reservations to CEDAW be lifted. Fourthly, to decriminalise homosexuality and respect the fundamental rights of the LGBT community. France would like to ask the following two questions. There's been a proposal of to a harmonisation of national law, and we wonder what the timetable for such implementation is. Thank you.
To Malaysia during the first round of the UPR, including legislative changes in the field of domestic violence. Germany remains concerned on some issues and would like to offer the following recommendations. First, bring legislation on the death penalty in line with international minimum standards, in particular by abolishing mandatory death penalty and the death penalty for drug-related offences, and take steps to approving moratorium with a view to eventual abolition. Second, ensure that detention conditions and provisions for access to legal and in particular judicial remedies comply with the international standards, and strengthen the training of police and other law enforcement officials and set up effective mechanisms to ensure an independent investigation of alleged misconduct. Third, take legislative and practical steps to guarantee that LGBTI persons can enjoy all human rights without discrimination. Fourth, duly investigate all cases of abuse of migrant domestic workers, bring perpetrators to justice, and allow migrant workers full access to legal remedies. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Guatemala welcomes the delegation of Malaysia and thanks it for participating in this exercise. Guatemala commends the country on its human rights progress. Among these areas of progress, my delegation would like to single out the establishment of the One Malaysia program, which basically is an initiative aimed at inculcating values such as moderation, tolerance, understanding and acceptance through tangible, positive and human being-based initiatives and programs. We also are pleased to say that as a result of the various national plans and programs, extreme poverty was eradicated in 2010 and poverty dropped to 1.7% in 2012. We view with satisfaction the establishment of administrative provisions for children born of Malaysian women born legally, married legally with a foreigner living in the country, outside the country. They can ask for the citizenship. We would now call on Malaysia to ratify the Convention Against Torture and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination and to extend an open
session. We highly appreciate the fact that the government addressed a few recommendations that were not accepted during the first UPR. Concerning Malaysia's international obligations, we note the ratification of several international instruments since its first review. However, Malaysia is still not party to major international human rights instruments. Therefore, we recommend that the government ratify ICRD, ICCPR, ICESCR and CAT. We take note of the high number of pending requests by special procedures to visit the country. In this context, we recommend that the government issue a standing invitation for UN human rights special procedures and accept all requested visits by mandate holders. My government appreciates the recent amendments to the Printing Presses and Publications Act, but is still concerned about its restrictive nature. Let me conclude by expressing our appreciation for the adoption of the Whistleblower Protection Act in 2010 and asking the distinguished delegation to provide a preliminary assessment on its effect on human rights defenders and media personnel. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Madam Vice President, India warmly welcomes the delegation of Malaysia led by Deputy Secretary General Dato' Ho Mei-yong. We thank the delegation for its national report and commend it for implementation of the recommendations made during the first UPR. We welcome Malaysia's commitment to continue widening the democratic space and upholding human rights, especially given the challenges of complex ethnic and cultural diversities. We commend its achievements in providing affordable housing, reducing poverty and attaining the MDG target well ahead of schedule. We appreciate the steps taken by Malaysia to widen access to education and welcome the National Education Blueprint that outlines a transformation program for Malaysia's education system. We also commend the steps taken by Malaysia towards enhancements of the rights of women and children. We are encouraged by Malaysia's withdrawal of its reservation to the Convention on the Rights of Children and its accession to its two protocols. We appreciate the steps taken by Malaysia to protect the human rights of migrant workers. In this regard, we take positive note of the comprehensive foreign workers registration program aimed at updating the foreign workforce database with biometric systems and also statutory minimum wages promulgated recently. We wish the delegation of Malaysia very best.
The Malaysian delegation and thanks them for the comprehensive presentation of their UPR report. Indonesia applauds Malaysia for their exemplary measures in following up various recommendations from the UPR mechanism. The repeal of much criticized ISA last year is commendable. In this regard, Indonesia recommends Malaysia to continue its effort to further enhance the exercise and enjoyment of civil and political rights, including the right to freedom of peaceful assembly in the country. My delegation also takes note of various positive efforts to protect the right and to enhance the safety and welfare of foreign workers working in Malaysia, including through establishing guidelines on employment and signing a number of agreements with such country. As country of origin, Indonesia recommends Malaysia to step up its effort in this regard, particularly to secure better working conditions for domestic workers and better protection for those undocumented migrants. In conclusion, Madam Vice President, as fellow ASEAN country, my delegation extends our best wishes to the people and government of Malaysia in the furtherance of their endeavors in the promotion and protection of human rights in the country. I thank you.
Islamic Republic of Iran welcomes the delegation of Malaysia and thanks them for its updated presentations. The well-prepared national report of Malaysia has indicated significant development in the promotion and the protection of human rights of its people. My delegation also recognized the initiative of the government in the poverty eradication and the efforts to strengthen living standards and the combating against child trafficking in the country. Mr. Vice President, my delegation would like to make 4 recommendations to the Malaysian for its consideration. To continue its effort to combat all forms of discriminations, particularly religious discriminations and protecting of religious minority groups. To enhance its efforts to anti-trafficking person measures. To enhance the initiative and the program to bolster a sense of national unity. To continue its endeavor in poverty eradications and in strengthening living standards and the shared experience in the best practice in that regards. Thank you, Madam Vice President.
Of Malaysia and thanks for its presentation today. In its response to a recommendation made at its last UPR to ratify the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention Against Torture, Malaysia stated that it would be in a position to do so once major issues related to the legislative framework were resolved. Ireland recommends that Malaysia set a time frame for the ratification of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention Against Torture. Ireland notes the 2012 amendment to the Printing Presses and Publication Act, which removes the requirement for annual renewal of publication licenses and allows decisions on publishing permits to be challenged in court. Ireland remains concerned that the Act has been used to block publications considered hostile by the government, continues to impose 3 years imprisonment for maliciously published false news and obliges accused individuals to disprove guilt. Ireland recommends that Malaysia repeal the Printing Presses and Publication Act and take steps to ensure full respect and protection for freedom of opinion and expression. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Distinguished Delegation of Malaysia. Italy welcomes the progresses achieved so far by Malaysia in the field of promotion and protection of human rights, as demonstrated in particular by the abrogation of the Internal Security Act and the achievement ahead of schedule of the MDG target on poverty reduction. While encouraging Malaysia to proceed with reforms in line with human rights international standards, Italy recommends that Malaysia may soon become a party to the core international conventions on human rights that it has not ratified yet. Italy notes the advancements in the field of the rights of women, especially in regard to the definition of domestic violence, and encourages Malaysia to increase efforts to address episodes of discrimination and violence against women, such as marital rape. Furthermore, Italy recommends that proper measures be adopted in order to discourage the practice of early enforced marriages. Italy is concerned by recurring news about restrictions regarding the full enjoyment of freedom of religion or belief. Italy thus recommends that Malaysia revises its legislative framework in order to ensure freedom of religion or belief for all. I thank you, Madam President.
Of Malaysia, led by Her Excellency Ms. Dato' Ho Mei Yong. My delegation thanks the Government of Malaysia for the comprehensive updates in the National Report on those recommendations accepted during the first cycle of the UPR, as well as information on recent developments to promote and protect universal human rights for its citizens. We are pleased to note the achievements highlighted, including the abolition of all fees for primary and secondary students in 2012 and the early attainment of MDG 1. My delegation recommends that the Government of Malaysia continue in its efforts to ensure an inclusive education system, particularly with respect to students with special educational needs and for those most in need of financial assistance. We look forward to the recommendations of the Interagency Standing Committee regarding accession to the ICSCR as well as the ICERD, and would encourage the Government of Malaysia to continue to give careful consideration to accession to or ratification of the other core international human rights instruments to which the government is not a state party.
Madam Vice President, we appreciate the efforts and resources required for a successful review and wish the delegation of Malaysia all the best in the process. Thank you.
Welcomes the delegation of Malaysia and thanks for its presentation today. Japan appreciates that Malaysia has been cooperating with civil society organizations and National Human Rights Commission for the promotion and the protection of human rights. To realize further progress in this area, Japan recommends that Malaysia issue a standing invitation to special procedures and consider early accession to major international human rights instruments such as ICCPR, ICESCR, ICERD, CAT, and ICPED. Japan is concerned by the restriction of freedom of opinion and expression as well as freedom of association and peaceful assembly as seen in the regulation of media and the internet and the prohibition of street demonstrations. Japan encourages Malaysia to continue its efforts to further ensure those rights. Concerns remain with regard to the condition of detainees. Japan recommends Malaysia to continue to improve domestic legislation in order to guarantee the right of detainees to a fair trial. Japan welcomes Malaysia's National Plan of Action for the Advancement of Women. We hope that Malaysia will submit its periodic reports to the CEDAW in a timely manner. Thank you, Madam Vice President
of Malaysia, headed by Her Excellency Dato' Ho Mayong, and thanks for the comprehensive introductory statement and for updating the Council on the current state of affairs pertaining to the promotion and the protection of human rights. Kazakhstan acknowledges the measures taken by the government of Malaysia in enhancing the enjoyment of human rights by its population, especially on adequate housing and the standards of living, education and health. We also positively note the management of cultural and religious diversity in the country towards effective, equitable and sustainable development. Given that, Kazakhstan delegation recommends first, to further fulfill the international taken obligations as well as joining new human rights international instruments. Second, to continue efforts on adopting the National Human Rights Action Plan. Third, to continue taking measures on combating trafficking in persons. Delegation of Kazakhstan welcomes the general trend in Malaysia towards establishing a moratorium on death penalty. For this reason, we call to the government of Malaysia to efficiently study on comprehensive reform of administration of criminal justice in the country, including on death penalty. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome the head of the Malaysian delegation, the Under Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the accompanying delegation. I'd like to thank her for the comprehensive presentation of the national report. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs has coordinated the preparation of this report with the specialized agencies, thus fostering its cooperation with the mechanism. We would like to thank Malaysia for implementing the recommendation that it accepted in the first review. Those recommendations were important in bolstering Malaysia's efforts to foster human rights and protect them, especially social, economic and cultural rights. We would like to thank the country for its legislations and the setting up of 5 independent committees to fight corruption. We would like to make the following recommendations. Launch an awareness-raising program to protect women and to protect children. Thank you.
Kyrgyzstan warmly welcomes the Malaysian delegation and thanks it for presenting its report. Malaysia has achieved noteworthy progress in the period under review in implementing its obligations with respect to the recommendations submitted in the review. We note with satisfaction that Malaysia is steadfastly striving to provide the people of its country with quality and accessible education. The government is earmarking a significant portion of the annual state budget to education. Over the period under review, the total volume of allocations to education in Malaysia from preschool to higher education amounted to, on average, about 50 billion Malaysian ringgits each year. In view of expanding access to education, there was a waiving of the tuition fees recently, which we also salute. We'd like to recommend, we welcome measures taken by Malaysia to encourage and protect human rights, and we'd like to recommend that they take the necessary measures to take into account gender aspects at all levels of the educational system, including teacher training. Our delegation wishes Malaysia success in its initiatives to encourage, protect and implement human rights. Thank you very much.
The delegation of Malaysia to the 17th session of the UPR working group. My delegation is pleased to note that Malaysia has achieved the MDGs targeted on the poverty reduction well ahead of schedule, and the government continues to take significant measures toward ensuring equitable access to the needed care and to improve the well-being of the people. We note with appreciation that Malaysia is a party to many core international human rights instruments. We also appreciate that Malaysia is actively sharing best practices in the promotion and protection of human rights at the multilateral and regional level in the framework of ASEAN and UN. In this connection, our delegation wishes to encourage the government of Malaysia to strengthen its cooperation with the UN, other international organizations and all stakeholders to overcome the constraints and challenges. Thank you.
Of Malaysia to its second cycle of the UPR and thanks them for the comprehensive national report and its presentation today. We note with appreciation the withdrawal of Malaysia its reservations to the Convention to eliminate all forms of discrimination against women and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Within this context, Latvia recommends Malaysia to continue exploring possibilities to extend its international commitments, in particular to consider ratification of ICCPR and the Rome Statute of International Criminal Court. While acknowledging the important role of special procedures in promotion and protection of human rights, Latvia recommends Malaysia to continue to strengthen its cooperation with the special procedures of the Human Rights Council by responding positively to the pending visit requests and eventually consider extending a standing invitation to all special procedure mandate holders. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. The delegation of the Lebanon wishes to greet the delegation from Malaysia, and we welcome the commitment of the delegation to the UPR mechanism. We also note all of the measures taken which testify to the will to cooperate with the mechanism. We have taken very good note of the national report of Malaysia, and we're pleased to note that good progress has been made in implementing those recommendations which the government of Malaysia accepted during the first UPR cycle. Madam Vice President, my delegation respectfully wishes to make the following recommendations. First of all, that you promote human rights education and training. Secondly, that you continue all efforts to promote the rights of women at all levels. Thank you.
Thank you. My country's delegation would like to congratulate Malaysia and extend its warmest congratulations to the delegation of Malaysia. We thank them for presenting their national report pursuant to paragraph 5 of the annex of the Human Rights Council document. My country has acquainted itself with the national report, and we recommend that Malaysia pay more attention to achieving even a higher level of achievement in the first housing plan. We also would salute the importance attached to education at all levels by the government. We note in particular the success achieved by Malaysia in reducing poverty as part of the MDG effort. We note that Malaysia has ratified conventions on the rights of the child and persons with disabilities, as well as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women. And we lastly applaud Malaysia's decision to host the
of Malaysia and wishes to thank for the valuable information provided in the national report. Liechtenstein welcomes Malaysia's initiatives for the promotion and protection of children's rights, the National Policy on Children and the National Child Protection Policy. However, we note with concern that there has been no progress in prohibiting corporal punishment of children, even in the penal system where the government had expressed its positive intention to reform the law. Therefore, Liechtenstein would like to recommend that Malaysia explicitly prohibit corporal punishment in all settings, including in the home and as a sentence of the courts. In addition, Liechtenstein recommends that Malaysia ensure the implementation of laws against corporal punishment by undertaking awareness-raising campaigns, encouraging the report of cases, and ensuring effective investigations and prosecution of perpetrators. Liechtenstein recommends that Malaysia ratify the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court in its 2010 version, including the Kampala amendments on the crime of aggression, and review its national legislation in order to ensure full alignment with the statute. Thank you, Madam.
The distinguished delegation of Malaysia to the working group on the UPR. My delegation would like to make the following recommendations. First, to ratify the ICCPR, ICESCR and Convention Against Torture. Second, to accede to the 2 optional protocols on CRC as well as to sign and ratify the 3rd optional protocol to CRC on communications procedure. Finally, to continue with its efforts to strengthen the enforcement of law on violence against women and protect the rights of women. Madam President, the Maldives welcomes the adoption of a number of important legislations by Malaysia aimed at the promotion and protection of human rights since its first review in 2009. The Maldives also welcomes the amendments to the Domestic Violence Act in 2012, which have expanded the definitions of domestic violence to include psychological and emotional injuries. The Maldives, however, is concerned by the alleged claims that there have been efforts to reclassify female genital mutilation as a medical practice. The Maldives encourages Malaysia to investigate these claims and draft legislation which forbids the practice of FGM. We wish the delegation of Malaysia all the success in its review. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, Madam President. On behalf of the delegation of Mauritania, I wanted to greet and thank the delegation of Malaysia. The national report testifies to Malaysia's firm commitment to human rights procedures and systems within the United Nations. Malaysia has had ongoing cooperation with human rights mechanisms. My delegation welcomes the establishment of a universal healthcare system. Perhaps I might venture to make the following recommendations. The government ought to continue all efforts to provide accessible healthcare and medications to all citizens. And secondly, we recommend that more funds be allocated for training to health care staff, including doctors, midwives, nurses, but social workers too. We wish the people of Malaysia the best of success. Thank you.
Distinguished delegation of Malaysia to the 17th session of the UPR. We thank Dato' Humayong, Deputy Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for the comprehensive and detailed presentation of the national report. My delegation welcomes the achievements and progress that Malaysia has made since its first review to improve the human rights situation in the country, particularly measures taken in the areas of education, health and housing, among others. We have also taken a positive note of some key developments in Malaysia, such as the repeal of the Internal Security Act, the adoption of a new law to promote and protect the right to peaceful assembly, and a new legislation to combat corruption, which reflect the commitment of the government of Malaysia to protect and promote the human rights of its people. Mauritius acknowledges the important measures that have been taken by the government of Malaysia to eradicate poverty and uplift the living standards of Malaysians. Mauritius therefore recommends that Malaysia continues to prioritize its policies aims at further improving the socio-economic conditions of its citizens. I thank you, Madam.
Malaysia for the presentation of their report and for the work that they've done within the working group, something which has involved a large number of non-governmental organizations and public bodies in the drafting of the report. Mexico takes a positive view of the progress made in terms of child protection, evidence through the accession to the optional protocols to the CRC, that is the optional protocol on the sale of children, child pornography and prostitution, and the protocol on children in armed conflict. To try and help Malaysia overcome its human rights challenges, my delegation wishes to make the following 3 recommendations. First of all, that you make it easier for those persons that have been resident of the large country, find it easier to obtain papers, and that you allow the registration of their children born in Malaysia. Secondly, that you develop disciplinary manuals and protocols to make sure that the use of force is strictly compliant with human rights principles. And we suggest a moratorium on the capital punishment and discussions to suggest alternatives. Thank you.
Her Excellency Ms. Dato' Humayong and the Malaysian delegation. We welcome the government of Malaysia's introduction of several significant law reforms in the previous UPR period. However, we remain concerned about the number of important UN conventions that Malaysia has not yet ratified. Montenegro kindly asked the delegation to elaborate on the intentions of the government of Malaysia to become a party to the main international instruments on human rights, particularly the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. We would kindly ask the delegation to also elaborate if the government of Malaysia has taken concrete measures in order to prevent child and early and forced marriages. Montenegro makes the following recommendations to the government of Malaysia. 1. To establish a moratorium on the use of the death penalty with a view to abolishing capital punishment for all crimes. 2. To extend a standing invitation to all thematic special procedures. And I thank you, Madam.
To thank Her Excellency Dato' Mayong, Deputy Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Malaysia, for her high-quality report. Ever since independence, Malaysia has worked successfully to promote diversity among the component elements of its society, to respect the religion and cultural particularities of each, and to guide everyone towards the development that is sustainable for all, respectful of their differences. We recognize the efforts made by Malaysia to ensure universal access to education, as is shown by the waiver by the government of fees for pupils in primary and secondary education. Morocco would also like to underscore the efforts being made by Malaysia to promote South-South cooperation in the area of the protection of the right to education and its promotion. The program the government transformation program launched by Malaysia is something to be congratulated. It should be congratulated for, as well as its economic transformation program. Morocco also salutes the implementation of the EKC plan, which has allowed Malaysia to achieve the MDG on the eradication of extreme poverty. Just 2 recommendations, Madam President: that the government continue facilitating access to funding, and second, that it share the lessons learned by Malaysia in the area of South-South cooperation. Thank you very much.
To the delegation of Malaysia to the second cycle of its country universal periodic review. It's meaningful to note that Malaysia registered remarkable achievements in the field of human rights in its first cycle of universal periodic review. Mozambique wishes to praise Malaysia for having achieved its Millennium Development Goals target of reducing poverty well ahead of its schedule. Malaysia has been successful in its effort to eradicate poverty and uplift the living standards of the poor. Malaysia has in place the Anti-Trafficking in Persons and Anti-Smuggling of Migrants Act, amended in 2010. Malaysia has also concluded agreements and memorandums of understanding with several countries in combating transnational crime. Mozambique would like to make the following recommendations. Recommends Malaysia to continue its efforts to eradicate poverty and uplift the standards of living for all Malaysians, including through ensuring effective implementation of the government transformation program strategies. Recommends Malaysia to allocate more resources to ensure the effective implementation of anti-traffic in persons smuggling of migrants persons. I wish the delegation from Malaysia successful universal periodic review. I think.
Led by Madam Dato' Ho Mayong, and we would like to commend them for the national report and comprehensive presentation. We congratulate the achievements made by Malaysia in its poverty eradication efforts. At headquarters, poverty has been eradicated in 2010, and Malaysia has also achieved the MDGs target on poverty reduction well ahead of schedule. We further commend the efforts of Malaysia in promoting the role of women in decision-making positions. We note with appreciation for several important measures that Malaysia has taken in its legislative sector to further enhance the exercise and the enjoyment of civil and political rights of Malaysia. Madam Vice President, my delegation would like to make the following recommendations for their considerations. To continue to address income inequality and share its experiences with other developing countries in the area of poverty eradication, in particular its e-Kitchen program. To share with others its good practices in easing childcare burden, which disproportionately affects women. We wish Malaysia all the success. And thank you, Madam President.
Malaysia, led by Her Excellency Ms. Dato' Ho Mayong, for the comprehensive presentation of the national report. My delegation appreciates the institutional and legislative measures taken by Malaysia for the promotion and protection of human rights. We take note with satisfaction that poverty eradication and uplifting living standards of people remain core policy objectives of the government. Progress made by Malaysia in achieving the MDGs is remarkable. My delegation commends the policy orientation of Malaysia towards ensuring women's equitable share in the acquisition of resources, information, opportunities, and in the benefits of development. The National Plan of Action for the Advancement of Women is noteworthy. While wishing Malaysia all success in its efforts to the promotion and protection of the rights of all segments of society, my delegation would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Give continuity to strengthening of national human rights mechanisms. And 2. Continue efforts to safeguard the dignity and to protect the rights of foreign workers, including through requisite institutional and legislative measures. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
I give the floor to the distinguished representative from Netherlands.
Madam Vice President, the Netherlands thanks the delegation for the responses to its written questions. The Netherlands compliments Malaysia for its efforts to reform a broad number of issues under the One Malaysia program, notably on ethnic harmony, national unity and efficient governance. Malaysia is not yet party to some key human rights treaties offering citizens basic protection. The Netherlands is specifically concerned about the practice of caning. It appears that police conduct in accordance with international human rights standards needs continued attention. Furthermore, the Netherlands is concerned about the situation of LGBT persons in Malaysia. Therefore, the Netherlands would like to recommend the following. 1. To ensure that police conduct be in accordance with international human rights standards through human rights training for all police and security officers and the signing and ratifying of the UN Convention Against Torture. 2. To repeal sections of the Malaysian Penal Code that criminalize consensual same-sex conduct between adults. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
And joins others in welcoming progress since 2009, particularly repeal of the Internal Security Act. We do consider that some challenges remain and offer the following recommendations. In order to strengthen Malaysia's institutional framework, particularly around police conduct, New Zealand recommends that Malaysia establish an independent police complaints and misconduct commission in accordance with the recommendations of the 2005 Royal Commission. We also recommend that Malaysia review recent amendments to the Prevention of Crime Act as well as implementation of the Security Offences Act for consistency with international human rights standards. New Zealand welcomes Malaysia's commitment to ensuring the rights of Indigenous peoples and recommends Malaysia establish an independent body to investigate disputes over land, territories and resources. New Zealand recognises the challenges that Malaysia faces on irregular migration and acknowledges Malaysia's cooperation with relevant international organisations and the Bali process. We recommend Malaysia sign and ratify the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees and enact domestic refugee law in line with international standards. We stand ready to share our own domestic experiences in addressing and tackling these issues. Thank you.
The delegation warmly welcomes the delegation of Malaysia and thanks them for the presentation of their UPR report. We commend the Malaysian authorities for the effort put into the preparation of this report and for their involvement of relevant stakeholders, including civil society. We also commend Malaysia for the progress made in the promotion and protection of the human rights of its citizens. We are particularly pleased to note that Malaysia is on track towards establishing a structured, responsive and inclusive national health system. This is evident in the introduction of various government health-related programs, as well as the improvements in the overall national health indicators, for example, reduction in the national maternal mortality ratio. We would like to make the following recommendations. 1. Take effective measures to reverse this increasing trend of HIV/AIDS incidence by strengthening the National Strategic Plan, NSP, on HIV/AIDS prevention. Take necessary steps to ensure the accessibility of the sexual and reproductive health services in government facilities. I thank you, Madam.
Malaysia's successes in approaching universal primary and secondary education. We encourage Malaysia to continue its efforts to ensure the rights and needs of children from marginalized and disadvantaged communities. Further, Norway recognizes Malaysia's commitment to increase the number of women in the labor force and in decision-making positions. We note efforts described in the national report to remove restrictions from ratified conventions and encourage ratification of more core human rights conventions. Nor would like to recommend the following. 1. ensure the rights of indigenous peoples and local forest-dependent peoples in law and practice, in particular regarding their rights to traditional lands, territories and resources, and 2. Ratify ILO Convention number 169. 3. Withdraw all reservation to CEDAW and abandon discriminatory laws against all women regardless of their ethnic and religious background. 4. Take concrete measures to prevent children from becoming stateless and guarantee universal access to free primary education irrespective of citizenship and immigration status. 5. Immediately establish an official moratorium on executions with a view to abolishing the death penalty. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank the delegation of Malaysia and the head of the delegation for the valuable information that they have given us and that have given us a very clear picture of the progress of human rights through the UPR. Madam, we have read very carefully the national report of Malaysia, and we realize how much attention Malaysia is according to honor its commitments to provide a number of services to raise the standard of living for all the members of the people of Malaysia, to eradicate poverty and to provide adequate housing for all, as well as to ensure education at all stages and providing quality education, especially to those with special needs. Malaysia is also continuing with its effort to establish a comprehensive health system, and all of that is in line with the methodology to strengthen human rights and United Nations mechanisms recommendations. Madam, from what we read in the national report, we realize how much comprehensive development has made progress in all parts of the country, and in this respect we would like to recommend to make more efforts to safeguard and ensure the benefits that would go to those who live in the rural areas to enjoy economic and social rights. I think.
Warmly welcomes Her Excellency Ms. Dato Ho Mei Yong for presentation of a balanced and objective second national report. We highly appreciate the constructive engagement of the Malaysian government with the review mechanism through implementation of majority of the recommendations received during its first cycle of the UPR. The enormous strides made by Malaysia in promotion of people-oriented programs and initiatives are commendable. We support the positive steps taken by the government in connection with domestic legislative reforms, healthcare poverty alleviation, housing, gender parity, women empowerment and provision of free education at both primary and secondary levels. We recommend Malaysia to continue to prioritize and facilitate funding access for prospective and eligible students from poor and low-income families to pursue higher education. Second, ensure that affordable healthcare and medicines remain available to all Malaysians, especially for those residing in the interior and remote areas of the country. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Malaysian delegation to this session of the UPR Working Group. The Philippines also welcomes Malaysia's constructive engagement with the Human Rights Council and the UPR process. The Philippines acknowledges Malaysia's progress in the fulfillment of UN Millennium Development Goals for 2015, particularly its achievements in providing affordable housing, reducing maternal mortality, and meeting its poverty reduction targets ahead of schedule. We are pleased with Malaysia's role in developing a post-2015 vision for the ASEAN community. Malaysia is home to a multitude of foreign workers. We note that Malaysia's domestic laws, as noted in its national report, provide for protection of the rights of migrant workers. The Philippines submits the following recommendations: to expand the protection scope for migrants and their families and continue efforts to enhance the safety and welfare of foreign workers, to consider ratification of or accession to core international human rights conventions to which Malaysia is not yet a party, including the International Convention on the Rights of Migrant Workers, to enhance measures to implement the CRC and CEDAW, and to combat trafficking in persons, especially women and children, including strengthening cooperation with NGOs in the area of protection of victims of trafficking in persons. Thank you.
Poland would like to thank the delegation of Malaysia for the presentation of their national report. We acknowledge the Malaysian government's engagement in the UPR process. We would like to recommend Malaysia to, first, broaden the scope of its international human rights obligation by acceding to ICCPR, ICSCR, ICERT and CAT. Second, to issue a standing invitation to all special procedures and accept their requests when they seek visit Malaysia. At the same time, we are concerned by the attempts to tighten control over the internet, restrict bloggers and limit the number of publications of different religions. We call upon Malaysia to develop an enabling and safe environment, allowing individuals to exercise their freedom of expression and the freedom of religion or belief. We therefore would like to recommend that Malaysia take effective measures to ensure the full realization of the right of freedom of expression by inter alia reviewing the Printing Presses and Publications Act the Sedition Act and the Evidence Act. I thank you.
Welcome the delegation of Malaysia, thanking them for their excellent presentation. My delegation values all the efforts Malaysia has been exerting to protect human rights. We also welcome the various steps legislatively and institutionally to enhance the participation of women in all aspects of life. And in particular, we would like to pay tribute to the national plan for the promotion of women. Finally, we would like to recommend the following: to continue efforts to implement the program to integrate women in development and providing mothers and children with health services, and to continue strengthening efforts to protect the rights of children in Malaysia. I thank you.
From Malaysia, and thank them for their substantive presentation of their national report. The Russian Federation greatly values Malaysia's efforts in the area of ensuring basic fundamental human rights and freedoms, and notes success along these lines achieved in the period under review. We welcome the willingness on the part of the government to expand its international obligations. We commend the changes in legislation aimed at strengthening democracy and the protection of human rights. We single out for special recognitions measures to encourage in the country interconfessional, inter-ethnic tolerance and inter-ethnic dialogue. We make the following recommendations: that the country continue close cooperation with the National Human Rights Commission and study ways of strengthening this institution's status and function. Second, that it continue encouraging the right to free, peaceful assembly in accordance with national legislation. And third, that it continue the implementation of initiatives to strengthen national unity and to promote inter-ethnic tolerance and respect. Thank you very much.
Of Malaysia, led by Her Excellency Madam Ho Mei Yong, Deputy Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, to the UPR Working Group, and thanks them for the comprehensive national report and presentation today. Sri Lanka congratulates Malaysia for having achieved the MDG target of poverty reduction well ahead of schedule. We are pleased to note that since its first UPR in 2009, Malaysia has acceded to the 2 optional protocols to the CRC. We welcome the priority given to the empowerment of women and their integration in national development. We also welcome efforts to formulate a national human rights action plan. Sri Lanka commends Malaysia for its commitment to provide quality and affordable education to its people. My country wishes to make the following recommendations to Malaysia. 1. Reinforce measures to eradicate poverty across all segments of society, including among the indigenous community. 2. Step up measures to address the shortage of teachers, especially in rural and remote areas. In conclusion, Sri Lanka wishes Malaysia success at its UPR engagement. I thank you, Madam Vice President.